Hi, everyone. I'm Joan Raymond, author and writing coach, and this is A Heart for Writing. And this is where we talk about everything writing to encourage writers of all genres and at any stage of the writing journey. Today, I am honored. My guest is Brendan Constantine, an educator and one of the most passionate creative writers and poets that I know. A bit of Brendan's background. Brendan is a poet based in Los Angeles. His work has appeared in many standards, including Poetry, The Nation, um, Best American Poetry. Sorry, I'm reading this, and all of a sudden, Tin House, Prairie Schooner, and Poem a Day. His most recent collections are Dementia, My Darling, 2016, from Red Hen Press, and Bouncy Bounce, 2018, a chapbook from Blue Horse Press. He has received support and commissions from the Getty Museum, James Irvine Foundation, and the National Endowment of the Arts. A popular performer, Brendan has performed his work to audiences throughout the US and Europe, also appearing on NPR's All Things Considered, TED ED, numerous podcasts, and YouTube. He currently teaches creative writing at the Windward School and since 2017 has been developing poetry workshops for people with aphasia and traumatic brain injuries. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
And I am going to switch my screen so we can see you, and the focus is on you, not me. So I'm going to just kind of pick your brain for a while and ask you a few questions about writing.
Okay.
So first of all, when did you first discover you had a heart for writing?
Oh my gosh. That's a question with a lot of answers. Let me see if I can pare it down a little bit. Well, as regards my career as a writer, I've been writing poetry in earnest. I can actually tell you the month and the year since November of 1994. At that time, I was traveling in Europe, and it seems that I'm always the last person to know what I'm up to. But one afternoon, I realized that I had been sitting in the same cafe every day for weeks and writing in a little book. And what I was writing weren't stories and they weren't songs, they were somewhere in between. And it suddenly hit me, oh my goodness, you've been writing poems. And everything changed at that point. So I can, and at that point I was about 27 years old, and I had tried lots of other things. I don't know if folks out there will identify with this, but growing up and in my 20s, I had an appetite and a knack for a lot of different art forms, an interest in a lot of art forms. And for some reason, I could never stay with them that long. I would stay with them just, until I reached the end of my abilities to sort of, coast. But once it got to be real work, I would beg off. And what was significant about my sort of discovery of my own desire to write poems was that was the art form I stayed with after it got difficult, and that might be, something that resonates with folks out there. It's the art form, that you're willing to really work on and also be confronted with your own limitations, and for some reason, even when I realized, how good I wasn't and how much I didn't know, and how long and wide that road was ahead of me, my response was to be excited by it and not put off by it for the first time.
So you were excited with the challenges and they didn't hinder you or stop you like with other art forms.
Right. Yeah, that they were, for the first time in my life, seeing that I had a lot of work ahead of me was only encouraging, was only interesting and exciting. It wasn't off-putting.
That's awesome. So you inspire young people, mainly middle schoolers and high schoolers, to write. Can you give us an idea of how you inspire them to write? Maybe some of the writing prompts you give them?
Sure. Well, I've been fortunate enough to teach in a variety of environments. I've worked with kids in high schools and camps and outreach programs and rehabs and correctional facilities. I mean, all over the place, where the students are there for all different reasons. Some are there because they signed up and they really wanted to do it, and others, bless them, were in that room because they were told to go there. And having worked in range of conditions and motivations, I've discovered that there are approaches that tend to work for a wide variety of kids. One thing that so far in 20 years of teaching has not failed me is talking about dreams. If if you're going to work with very small children or middle schoolers or teenagers or, gosh darn it, adults, you can always get a room full of people talking if you just engage them on the subject of dreams, starting out usually by talking about the kinds of dreams that are supposedly common, and asking who in the room has had them. Have you ever had the falling dream, the flying dream, the dream where your arms and legs weigh 1,000 pounds, or the dream where, where you accidentally go into public naked and need to cover up, or the, any good guide to dream interpretation will give you all the scenarios you're not thinking of. And you will see hands go up left and right. And then it's a very short walk to just saying, well, let's try writing one down. Let's try writing something as though you had the freedom that you have in dreams, where time doesn't necessarily move in a straight line, where you can suddenly find yourself moving from one world to another, where the house that you recognize as yours in a dream looks nothing like your real house, and you just go with it. What if there were no restrictions and you just, and quite often, with that sort of safety zone that's represented by saying, okay, I'm writing a dream. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't even have to be linear. What it has to be is rich in images and sensation. Then, usually you'll find they're all getting something on the page. And that's quite often a really good place to start with anyone. I've also found that more often than not, I'll start every workshop with what's called free writing, so that anybody that's in a workshop with me, or my students at the Windward School know, every day is going to begin with writing of some kind. That you're going to start off by, at the beginning of the class, writing for 5 to 10 minutes, with no pressure to share it, no pressure to defend it. I usually will put a prompt of some kind on the board. Usually it's, half of a sentence. And I'll say, finish that sentence and write without stopping for 5 minutes. Don't worry about it being any good. Don't worry about anybody having to see it or whether or not it's a poem. Just go. Just pretend that your imagination is exactly like the kitchen drawer that is so full of crap you can't see the bottom. And all you're doing is just cleaning out the top layer and letting it land on the page. Usually, if I start a room off doing that, segue into dreams, in about an hour, you'll have interesting writing from everyone.
And what's interesting is how you said you don't have to worry about sharing it. I think that was always the scariest thing, is once you write, it's like, uh-oh, I'm going to get graded. And so it has to be perfect. And that will kill creativity right away.
And if you are willing as an instructor to do the prompt with them and write something truly awful, and then you go ahead and share it along with everyone else, you will find that anybody that was reluctant to share at the beginning, quite a few of those people will change their vote. Once a few people start sharing,
right,
and they start getting a sense of like, oh, okay, you'll find that more and more, they're getting a little bold.
I agree. Yeah.
So one
I was
last
gonna say, I was gonna say I taught, creative writing classes to the adult school,
Mm,
and, so most of the students were 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and I would do the writing prompts with them, and I'd always be the first one to share, and, before the end, everybody was sharing because they knew it
right.
was safe. They knew I wasn't afraid of messing up, so they weren't either.
One last thing I'd like to add, particularly when it comes to working with youth, and I find that expressing a particular sentiment with them will quite often free them up. And it's this. Personally, I lose patience whenever I hear adults referring to young writers as the voices of tomorrow. And because it suggests that they don't have anything to say right now. And I've spoken to, countless rooms full of, children and teenagers in exactly these terms, saying, it bugs me whenever anybody says you're the voice of tomorrow, because I feel you're the voice of right now. You are the voice of the moment. You're the first responders to history. And you are the ones that are going to live long enough to relate what's happening today to the next generation. So you are, in fact, the voices of the moment, and you are who I need to be listening to. And I find that, put in that perspective, even a reluctant writer will start to, to look at things just a little differently and say, okay, well, yeah, all right. Because I think largely young writers want respect for one of the last things anyone supposes they have, and that is authority. Uh, and uh, and the children in your household are in fact authorities on something, and if that's and having that acknowledged can be priceless. I know it made I still remember the adults from my childhood who didn't talk down to me, who treated me as though I had something relevant to contribute, no matter how small and inexperienced I was.
Yeah, and you were listened to, and you listened to your students, and I know they appreciate
I
that.
was really blessed that way.
Yeah. I've asked Brendan to read a couple of his poems before we get into some more questions. So if you could read something for us.
Sure. Let me bring some things up.
Sure.
I'm going to read you some newer work, and I'm going to try to read some things in some different styles. So let's see here. Okay. This is a poem that's up at a wonderful site called Plume, Plume. I was really excited to be able to share a poem at this journal. This is called A Controlled Substance. My brother is late again. Somehow the glass of water by his plate, the fact that we filled it without him, makes him all the later. Dad tells us to start eating, says there's nothing worse than cold fish. But suddenly no one can find a rhythm. We fumble our napkins like we've never seen them before, like it's just occurred to us we're in the wrong house, aren't even a family, but four people kicked off the same bus for being vulgar. So much is worse than cold fish, I think. The flowers on the table, the bubbles in my brother's glass, the size of our all. There must be traffic, my mother says, and I understand it as a command. Yes, there must be. My brother deserves a good reason, not the only reason that he is deep in his bed, as if at the ocean floor, where it is still the first night on earth, and whatever moves there must grow its own light. And This is something perhaps a little more playful. This is a recent poem called Like Satan. I was reading your poem in a small room in the mountains, and I was tired, making myself do it because I said I would. To read this way is like driving on bad ice. At any moment, you can slide into the wrong meaning of a word and not know until you hit a harder one. Or worse, just keep sliding and never know how wrong you really are. I got to the part where the woman stepped out into evening, where you say her dress was the color of sunset, how it shone like satin. But I thought it shone like Satan and was sure I understood. I closed the book thinking of how Satan shines. Of course he's like the sunset, a color more beautiful and difficult than red. He is, in fact, the sun going away, and where he goes always looks like a good time, a good old time, just past those clouds, just down the hall, where something flickers, where music softens to a better melody, laughter rises then falls further away, which is why night is always trying to follow, like a child who wants to go where the big kids are going, the tall backs, where the songs and the colors and the girl in the unbelievable dress are sure to be. I woke and read the passage over, spent the morning thinking about satin, how disappointing it is, like silk but not silk, shining but worthless, imitation fire. I can never tell you this, of course. So I changed the facts, added a woman, a sunset. It was another word that brought the devil, a word you used like a fool. And I'll read one more.
Okay, sounds good.
And this is something a little more recent, and I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to hope that this doesn't get it disqualified from getting published someday. And here we go. This is, I'll just say that this is one of those, this is a kind of love poem that could only exist at this time. And it's a post-cell phone love poem. And for anybody who's been in love and separated by miles and had to stay up at night sending texts, this is called Station to Station. Lovers light their faces in the night. One plays mahjong with a thumb, the other watches a lion eat wedding cake. You up? You alone? You a hotel burning down? Pretend the blanket is grass and I am a fallen fence post. Or you're a romance novel left on a train endlessly crossing Kansas. Funny how a room gets smaller around a bed, but vanishes around a phone. To almost touch is to not touch at all. To send a picture of where we want to be touched is a postcard from a made-up country. According to the rules, one lover falls asleep first, the other stays awake to review the transcript. And between them, all dark fields must roll, and all dark hills must roll, and all dark seas lay perfectly still.
There's just something about hearing poetry instead of reading it that just changes it. I much enjoy it more listening, I will say.
Well, thank you, I think.
So I know you're passionate about your workshops for people with aphasia and traumatic brain injuries. Can you talk about the workshops? And also there's a big anthology coming out that I know you're very proud of. So can you talk
Yeah,
about that too?
yeah, and there's a lot of people, there's a lot of folks to acknowledge. Um, uh, Years and years ago, I started working with a man named Gary Glazner, who had developed uh, a series of workshops called the Alzheimer's Poetry Project. And under his guidance, I began following um, basically his lead. He had created poetry workshops for people dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. And on the strength of having, of doing a number of workshops like this, and when I was on book tours, making a point of stopping in different states and visiting elder care centers and conducting workshops like Gary's, I came to the intention of a speech pathologist here in Los Angeles, a wonderful man named Michael Beal. And he and his wife were hosting a book club for people with aphasia. Aphasia is a neurogenic communicative disorder or cognitive impairment to the language centers of the brain. It generally manifests as an inability to recall words or name objects, a profound difficulty speaking, reading, or writing. At base, it's a radical disorder of your ability to communicate. The most common cause is stroke, but it can also arise from blunt force trauma, brain tumors, infections, high fever, and it can be sometimes, it is temporary, and sometimes it can be so severe as to make communication all but impossible. And recent estimates put the number of just Americans known to have aphasia is well over 2 million. And it's believed that, and that is to say people that have ongoing aphasia, but something like 180,000 people a year experience some form of it. And Mr. Beal had said, look, we've noticed an interesting thing. I've got this book club for people who have aphasia, where where we do read books and we take our time digesting them and discussing them. But we've noticed an interesting thing, which is whenever the group is looking at books of poetry, they become particularly engaged. And he said, he says, I have a few theories why that might be, but I'm not really sure what the reason is. Would you be willing to come out and try leading poetry writing workshops for the group? And I said, well, I don't know how to do that. I do know how to work with roomfuls of writers. And I can just, I can do my best. And I showed up one afternoon, as I say, in 2017, with absolutely every trick I could think of. And, not to mention toys and props and games and picture books and, Scrabble letters, anything I could lay my hands on that might result in a word landing on a table. And slowly but surely, we developed one round of workshops, and then that, turned into, 6 and 8 week sessions. And the next thing I knew, I was visiting other groups. And right now, I'm working with a group based in Wisconsin, and they've been writing with me since about October of 2020. And they have just released their first anthology of poems. It's called I Don't Think I Did This Right. And it contains work from a variety of writers who are dealing with a variety of linguistic constraints. Some are dealing with the legacy of traumatic brain injuries. Others have straight up aphasia. and have been basically relearning how to communicate. And one of the things that has one of the more profound effects on me, being around them, has been a complete and total reappraisal of what poetry is for and the source of strength that it can be. Because, most of the therapies for aphasia, which, by the way, I'm not knocking, there are amazing therapists and therapies out there for people that are dealing with these constraints. But on the whole, a lot of the available therapies are primarily corrective. In other words, trying to help the person with aphasia to communicate in a familiar and predictable way. But we found that that these therapies seem to be, anyways, at this stage of the game, very much enhanced and complemented by there being a theater, a forum, an area in their lives where they can use language completely creatively, where we are not interested in the next expected word, where we are not interested in necessarily abstracts, or even in conveying information. We're interested just in conveying feeling. And that is largely what poetry represents from culture to culture, an emotional vocabulary. And so it has been, it has been my observation, working with multiple groups now, that you would think that the last thing that you would want to subject someone to who is having trouble making words would be something like poetry. But indeed, it seems to be a truly magic experience for someone who's dealing with this condition, because they're allowed to, it's the art form where you are allowed to completely change and innovate in your usage. And literally turn language on its head for the purpose of a greater communion. And so, as I say, it's caused me to completely reappraise what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, what its uses are. And it reminds me again, and I think this is true of any writer in any discipline that's watching this interview today, is how easily we forget that writers are not their target market. We're not our own target market. Poets get very used to being the only people that show up at poetry readings and the ones that seem to largely buy poetry books. And we forget that what we were doing was never for us. It was for anyone who was confronted with trying to say something unsayable. And it's the whole reason, it seems, from culture to culture, poetry has manifested. Is because at some point people discover that their day-to-day use of their language falls short of expressing some very urgent and amorphous things, and that they suddenly need to get really creative. They need to use only their most beautiful words, or only their sacred words, or they must give the language a musicality, a rhyme, a meter, something to distinguish it. And as I said, they may deliberately misuse that language for the purpose of a greater communion, and there poetry is born.
Hold up the book again. I have there's the to order the book.
Yes.
Yes, it's right on screen right now. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This chapbook, which is chock full of poetry, and also, in some cases you can kind of see, what the initial challenges were that the writers were given. So not do the poems all work, so to speak, but they'll make you want to try things the same way. They're going to make you want to write. The group is charging $10 for this collection. The proceeds go directly to basically to providing more such poetry groups. I believe it's $10 for the book and $4 for shipping if you write to thursdaynightpoets@gmail.com. And just say, hey, I want to get a copy of I Don't Think I Did This Right. they will they will happily send them to you in any number. Uh, and keep an eye out, because, as I say, the book has just come out, and the group is already starting to do readings from this collection online. And I think, depending on where you live in the United States, you might actually be able to see some of these poets in person. We're also hoping that the release of this book is going to encourage other groups to start, putting their work out into the water supply. What I'd love to see is that, eventually more and more such groups emerge, that more folks that are dealing with aphasia and traumatic brain injury are empowered by poetry, and and see it as a source of strength and clarity.
That's awesome. Thank you. So let me move on just a little bit. So what do you do when the words won't come?
Whew. What do I do, or what does one do?
What do you do? And that's my first question. I want this to be personal. What do you personally do when the words won't come?
Well, it's interesting, because the words not coming, that can be a very particular feeling. And let me see if I can contain this answer. Well, the short answer is I try writing anyway. If the right words won't come, then I start writing the wrong ones. The funny thing, and the thing that I think that we can forget as writers, I mean, heaven help you if you've ever had any success. And by success, I don't mean pats on the back. I mean just your own approval for 5 minutes on something that you've written in the past, where you thought, wow, okay, that's pretty good. Because right there, you may make the mistake of giving yourself something to compare your next piece of writing to. And I've come to believe, fervently believe, and my students have got to be sick to death of hearing me say this, that writer's block is almost never a shortage of ideas or magic. It is almost always a surplus of judgment. We are editing before anything lands on the page. You're sitting there looking at the blank page and you're going, no, everybody begins when, no, I don't want to write a sonnet. It's, and you don't, and nothing lands there. And the truth of the matter is that you've got to just jump. You've got to get over yourself and jump in. And it's true that the more discouraged you may be, the more cynical you may be about it, the longer you may have to, the more of that page you might have to fill up before you get a little something going. But if you stay with it, it really will happen. And this is advice that, I'm happily give my students, but that I am also slow to take. But every time I do, I swear to you, something starts to happen. I think part of the problem also is the illusion that we will recognize the future. And I mean, I think that gets, in our way in virtually every walk of life. If you're having a good and contented life, or you're having a hard time right now, we all want and hope for miracles, completely forgetting that there's no reason we should recognize a miracle when it appears, because it's outside of our experience. And you are foolish to think that you're going to recognize your next good piece of writing when it appears. Quite often we're the last person to know, and a number of other authors over the years have weighed in on this. And these are all things, this is all an answer to your question. This is all stuff that I try to keep in mind, that whatever I start writing about is probably going to have two subjects. There's the subject that I think I'm writing about, and there's the subject that's going to emerge the longer I'm writing. For poets, I do think they're a really useful metaphor. I'm gonna pretend we're in one of my classes. What do you call a group of lines in a poem?
A stanza?
Well done. 10 points. A stanza is an Italian word, and it means room. The stanzas of the poem are the rooms of the poem. And once again, another way of understanding that a poem is not necessarily a thing to decipher or solve. A poem is a place to dwell. So if we acknowledge two things, one, that, you might have to be writing for a while for your real subject to emerge, that you might have to, and that includes writing stuff that you don't care about, and just staying with it and staying with it and staying with it, no matter how dispirited, bored, or discouraged you may be, just continuing to put one word after another. You got to keep doing that before your real subject may appear. And keeping in mind the sort of handy metaphor of the stanzas of the poem being the rooms of the poem, then we can look at it this way. In order for your subject to have some place to arrive, you may have to get some rooms built. And the more rooms you build, the more doors your subject can knock on. And, later on in the editing process, then you can remodel the house, so to speak. Then you can go back and look at your draft and go, oh, this poem actually starts in the bedroom, or this poem starts in the kitchen. I can wipe out all the other rooms now, and just start there. But like I said, you might have to get a few rooms built, and so sometimes even when I'm really, bored with it, I can, or it's taken, or I'm in my second or third page of something that I'm, not really taken with. If I can keep saying, just keep going, just keep building rooms, keep building rooms, keep building rooms, I'll, it's going to come. And it hasn't failed me yet. Certainly I've knocked out drafts of things I've gotten a couple of pages in and then sat up and gone, well, I can't tell if that went anywhere, and then put it aside. And don't throw, that's the other piece of advice. And this is still part of the first answer. Don't throw anything away. Don't throw anything away. Once you've done that, if you've taken me at my word for this first part, don't throw anything away. Just put it in a drawer, or start fresh the next day, or tell yourself, I'm going to write till I get to the bottom of the page. I'm going to pick up another page and I'm going to start writing about something completely different and put that a page. So whatever it is, just hang on to all of it and be willing to maybe look at it by the end, at the end of the week, the end of the month, and go back. Okay. Because chances are you can't really see it yet. If it's fresh, you probably don't really know what's there.
Awesome.
That's my great big answer.
Well, you kind of answered the next question, which is going to be my last question. If you had advice for beginning poets and writers, and what about established writers? What would your advice be to the two different groups, those starting out and those that are already in the muck of it all,
Well, first and foremost, make lots of mistakes. Make as many mistakes as you can. Make them publicly if possible. There is no more persuasive an instructor than allowing yourself to make lots and lots of mistakes and then have to own them later. Boy, oh boy, will you start to literally hone a craft as one hones a tool. The other thing I would say is to give yourself the freedom to imitate, to write emulations, to find work that by other writers that you enjoy, read a bunch of it, try writing in their styles, and there are a million ways to do that that don't just come down to simply structuring a sentence the same way. One of my favorite emulative games is to do what I call the opposites game, which is where you take a piece of writing by somebody you admire and you just refute everything they've said. You say the opposite of everything they say, or you write a poem in response to what they're saying, or you isolate all your favorite lines by a particular author, space them out in the page, and write your own new connective tissue to all of those lines. So I would say allow yourself to make lots of mistakes. Allow yourself to find writers you admire, and and follow their lead. Another thing that I would say that seems that has helped me a great deal, and it took me a long time to get to this point, would be a willingness to read authors, particularly, whatever your genre is. If you're a fiction writer, if you're a poet, what have you, read writers that really bug you. Read, if there's a novelist or a poet out there that just drives you nuts, you're just like, God, this sucks. I hate this person. You're that judgmental. Chances are there's something there. And by that, I mean, not the sort of, exhausted truth that there's some self-consciousness on your part, or that you're recognizing something in their work that you're actually doing. No, nothing like that. But to acknowledge that if you are having that strong a response to another writer, it's quite possible that you are failing to recognize you're inspired. That tendency to want to flinch or to correct what another writer is doing, or to turn it into something else, or an epiphany about something that they seem blind to, means that you are at that moment seeing something very clearly, or are about to. And that you may only be aware that you're pissed off. What you might really be is inspired. And that, and that there, even work that just seems to leave you cold might suddenly be really useful to you, and might clarify something for you that you didn't realize was opaque, and that, this happened to me years ago with a writer that, my frustration with a particular writer was only made worse by the fact that a number of my friends and colleagues loved this particular poet. I'm not going to tell you who it is. And, but I would look at this person's work and go, what on earth? Who cares about this? This is terrible. Like, God, I mean, why would you write a poem like this when you could set fire to all of your money, or break your kneecaps with a hammer, or, you could scream into a box and mail it to yourself? Why on earth would you, why would you waste time with this? And it got so bad that, like, I would read one of their poems and I would write a poem in response to it, just undoing everything they said. If they said it was daytime, I would go, no, it's not, I would, whatever it was. And one day I suddenly realized, wait a minute, who has sent you to the drawing board more consistently? The poets that you supposedly admire, or this person? Because this is the one who's making you work. This is the one who's getting you to work something out. And maybe you should, maybe you sort of forgotten what it means to be moved by something, and, I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make with reading, whether it be poetry or fiction or whatnot, is to look at a piece of writing and say, well, I don't like this because I don't see anybody like me in this. And, it's quite possible that it was never supposed to be a mirror. It was supposed to be a door. And, a book is a door. A poem is a door, a window, a whole room. And, don't, or as my mother, a wonderful poet, likes to say, don't look for yourself in the art. Look for the art in yourself.
That's amazing. You've just, given us aha moments, the aha moments that you get. And like you said, a poem has many rooms, so maybe you don't like certain rooms, but there's always going to be a room that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to bring us back like this. And Brendan, thank you for spending this time with me, answering questions, inspiring us with your work and your own personal work and your work with this anthology. I'm excited about this. I hope that you get a lot of orders. I hope they get a lot of orders, and more people will see what you're doing and try to emulate that too. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for making me so welcome.
Oh, well, it's always a pleasure. It's been a while since I've seen you in person, but it's always a pleasure. So thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed what you see here, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to my channel because I'm going to have a lot more fun interviews just like this. Thank you.
Thank you.